Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, we are going to focus in our Maine Engagement and Attendance Center office hour. We're going to be joined by content expert Rita Pello. She is the Title I coordinator and ESEA regional program manager for York and Hancock counties. And today, we're going to have a super packed conversation about Title I family engagement. Really looking at ways to improve attendance through family and community partnership. It's been, Rita and I were just chatting a couple seconds ago, and I said to her, it was super noticeable to me how, as I've had this topic on my mind, everywhere I'm looking, attendance is, they're saying the number one indicator of success is when you truly have family on board. So today is going to be a super valuable conversation. And with that, I will introduce to you, I probably should introduce myself too, for those of you who have not yet met me. I am Sarah Nelson. I am the Student Engagement Specialist with the Office of School and Student Supports, and I work on the Climate, Culture, and Resilience team. And as I said, my focus is on engaging students, helping provide guidance and technical assistance for the field to really find foundational, impactful strategies and practices to engage students. But recently, one of my hats has been attendance. And it's funny, again, when I started really focusing on it, my lens just was like, wow, everything in school is around attendance. If you don't have the kiddos there, how are you going to affect change in all the other areas? So as a classroom educator of over 30 years, I wear that hat at all times. And it's a delight for me to be able to hear firsthand from Rita all of the aspects of Title I and how the valuable resources we have available. So I will pass the baton
Great.
to Rita. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. I'm excited to be here. I know we tend to work in our lanes, and sometimes it's hard to get out and join another group, another sort of think tank of sorts. So I'm really glad to be here. I recognize folks on this call, and I'm excited to talk family engagement. So, yeah, I am Rita Pello. I am one of two Title I folks, and I will talk about what Title I is. It's not the kind of words that maybe bounces off a page for folks not familiar. But it's funding, it's additional federal funding. And whenever there's money attached to something and they want you to do something with it, it's good for us to embed it in our practices and to think about it sort of big picture to be able to have the schools that we all sort of want to see prosper and give students the best outcomes and opportunities possible. So excited to talk a bit about family engagement today. Overall, my agenda is quite relaxed. I actually, for the most part, will just talk a bit about what Title I family engagement is. There is a lot of statutory requirements, but more so the intent and purpose of why that law exists the way it exists and why it's written the way it's written. I do actually, for the most part, want to just share examples from districts across the state. We have a Title I summer school grant, and I get to ask what worked in your programs, and I get to hear from districts directly. So two huge takeaways with homeschool practices was family engagement, right, and attendance, strengthening attendance was family engagement and community partnerships. And I'll talk about both of those. And then just some key takeaways as I learned from the field, what's working in the schools, and some resources and guidance around Title I family engagement so that you feel emboldened and empowered to come back to your schools and your districts with some strategies or even just wonderings and have a conversation with the leaders in your schools. I think it's fun if you're a policy nerd like me to understand that this is actually really old legislation. This is from the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which was signed in 1967 by the President Lyndon B. Johnson, but it has been reauthorized several times. This is flagship federal legislation. You know, we have a decentralized education system in the United States. States handle a lot, local control in certain states. However, federal funds do flow into states for particular reasons. Of course, there are strings attached, but they're there to provide that supplemental funding for certain instances. And Title I specifically is funding for districts. They are the grantee recipient. The state is a pass-through. The districts receive funding for their high poverty schools. And the funding is spent at the school level to improve student outcomes for those that are most at risk of failing. And that is kind of how it's written in that sort of old-timey federal language. Two types of Title I schools. So for most of you, this might be a refresher, but it's nice to know there are targeted assistance programs and school-wide programs. And for those that work and collaborate with school-wide programs, there will be a school-wide training February 4th. That's on the PD calendar. We're going to dive deep into school-wide flexibilities because if family engagement or attendance are your high need areas, you have quite a bit of flexibility in spending those funds in those particular initiatives. So I'll talk about that as we continue to kind of build our capacity in understanding this law because it's opaque and it's long and it's vague. And so how do we implement it in our schools and feel empowered to do the things that work for our students?
So, Rita, one of the things you and I talked about was in this setting, we have a very, very diverse group of people that are coming together. So, for some people, they may find the Title I language highly applicable, and others might be like, hey, wait a second, that's not even in my wheelhouse. But what we talked about was even if this is, we think about this as a buffet of opportunities and resources and practices. And if it's something that might not be something that you feel is super applicable for yourself, perhaps you could think about someone in your school community with whom you could share that. So I appreciate you, Rita, kind of giving us the foundational information so that even those of us, as I said, as a classroom educator, I was not super familiar. I mean, I knew we had the Title I support, but I didn't really understand all the nuances behind it. So thank you for giving me the 101 on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Title I has morphed, right? And I'll talk a bit about the reauthorization of ESEA. It used to be under NCLB, quite a bit of emphasis on targeted drill and kill, pull out, getting students who are remedial to just get back to grade level. And Title I should and can look different in this modern day. So I think we want to sort of increase our understanding of the statute, mostly to get the idea of how flexible the type of model can be that works for your students instead of feeling incredibly sort of pigeonholed into one particular type of program. So I do want to empower districts to think about that and work with them so that they can have programs that are responsive to their student needs.
And I'm seeing that in our chat. People are coming up with some phenomenal things. They're very, very different. How about our books and blankets night where kids dress up in PJs and read with flashlights? Oh, I love that idea. And then we have, the literacy and math family nights. So the point that you're making of think about what your people, what your school community really needs, and then tailor things for that family lunches. These are great ideas, guys. Thank you for sharing them.
And I think it's important too, when you see like how legislation is written, Title I is for high poverty schools, but there is specific statute and it's quite long and it's quite concrete specifically around family engagement. And you wonder why. Why does high poverty school legislation have a major section in family engagement? And I'll talk about why, right? We, at this point, many professionals here who are on this call work in the schools and understand that you are a community center first and foremost, that relationships with families will improve attendance, engagement, student outcomes, knowing what your families go through, the culture and climate of the school and the surrounding city and town, that all bleeds into the school, becomes part of how the school functions. And so family engagement, working with parents, using them as collaborators on how to reach student needs is major. And it's actually in Title I through quite a bit of statutory requirements that I am not going to use this call to go over. I actually have a document online and I'll share all these resources at the end of the presentation. But I have a 2-page or 3-page, it might bleed into the 3rd page on all the requirements around family engagement. But the one that I really want to highlight, and the reason why I do think Title I is relevant to most folks, is that We have probably about 400 some Title I schools in the state. We have 189, about 180 districts that take ESEA funding, and Title I is one part of ESEA funding. So it is that federal flagship funding that most districts interact with. So just good to know that, even if you're at the school level or the classroom level, that your district administrators are required to have a lot of family engagement notifications, a policy, a compact. It's just good to know that. And it's good to actually have a family engagement policy that is living and breathing, because I will tell you that I sit on the school board currently, and we never get to those policies quick enough. So it's always one of those things where when I say as a state agent to have a policy that actually mirrors your practices, I know that might be harder in practice. But why have a family engagement policy if it has the language from NCLB and has nothing to do with how your schools actually conduct family engagement activities, whether it's how they solicit feedback, the annual nights they have, or how they communicate, right? Is it a website now? Because some of these old policies I see don't even reference a website. So I think it's just important that we have a policy that actually gets implemented, and that means looked at and shared, and even in language that parents understand. I know that that's sort of the North Star, I would say, of Title I, is having a policy and, in fact, really following it. And it is good to know for folks on this call that districts that receive more than $500,000 in Title I actually have to spend at least 1% of that allocation of those funds on family engagement practices. They can even set aside more than that. But if they're setting aside 1%, they're spending 90% of that at the school level, and that is a requirement every grant year. So just good to know that in case you're an SAU or a district that has that money floating around, and maybe you want to try different strategies or initiatives to get parents in the door, you can have those funds there for those purposes.
Whew, good to know that. Thank you.
And then the last thing that I think we just don't talk about a lot is the reauthorization every time the law becomes new again, right? Yeah, I will say Congress reappropriates on a normal congressional world. Congress appropriates these funds every year, but they don't change the language and update the law every year. They do that about every 10 to 12 years. So we're due potentially for a reauthorization at some point. The last reauthorization was under Obama. And I wanted to pull this statute out because, as you can see, it starts with the word may, which is a great statutory sort of clue that it is not a requirement. But perhaps the fact that they decided to write these here show that they might see some effective practice within these strategies that you may incorporate. So these are different than the requirements that you have to send those letters, you have to translate to languages parents understand. These are the mays. And I wanted to pull them out because they are newer language, and it's sort of trying to fill those gaps from 2001 to 2015. And I think it's important to note that you could be, for instance, paying for childcare for parents to come to a family engagement event, or their transportation if it's reasonable. You can even train parents to enhance the involvement on certain programs or particular things you want them to do with the students. You can get them to train the teachers. You can invite them for something, and that you can pay for them to come out and do that training. You can pay for light food and meals if it's during mealtime to get families there, but it's all about the fact that that would increase attendance and help make a Title I night much more effective. So
Rita, I'm thinking all about the many schools that I hear from that say families just don't care, and then we're really thinking of ways we can kind of shift the narrative on that and say, well, maybe what are some of the barriers that are stopping them?
Yep.
Did I hear you say that we potentially could use the Title I funding to pay for food if it was during a mealtime?
Yeah, reasonable and necessary, always with federal legislation, reasonable and necessary. So no lobster, no steak, right? But if we're talking about muffins at breakfast to get them to come for a morning meeting, or if we're talking about pizza or things like that, to get them there, right? Because the idea here is that if you want to have a night and you want it to be from 5 to 7, and you wanted to have them come to the different teachers or have different activities, the ways in which you can do that is sort of consider what are the barriers. That is true. Transportation might be a barrier, food might be a barrier, and to undo those barriers. Translation services might be a barrier. So how do you mitigate those barriers? And in fact, oftentimes what I see with this particular optional is really about undoing those barriers. So arranging school meetings at a variety of times, and here it says in-home conferences, and now we have Zoom. And so you can be Zooming with them, right? I know Augusta does parent-teacher conferences 3 ways: phone, Zoom, and in person. And you can say what your vibe is as a parent, and that sort of reduces that barrier. So folks here on the call have probably seen many ways in which this is facilitated and done, but it's nice to see this is actually in statutory federal law, these
I love it.
particular
Even
strategies.
back in the day, they were already thinking about I see you, I hear you, I value you, and talk about a way to really make those solid engagements with family. Thank you for bringing that to our
Yep.
attention.
And I do think that the second bullet's interesting too. You can provide literacy training to parents. I actually have seen districts do that. So very interesting. Okay, and this is probably the part that is more exciting. I just want to really quickly sort of plug my bridge here from family engagement to summer school. I promise there is a thread. Title I Summer Program is a grant that I facilitate. 79 districts across the state took advantage of Title I reallocated funding last year to do summer school programming for Title I students, whether that was at the school-wide programs or targeted identified students. And why I'm here today mostly is because this grant, I ask this question at the end of the grant during the performance report, and I receive pages and pages of narratives from districts that are reporting what works in a summer program. And why I really love that is because the summer program is so truncated and they're up against the barriers of summer and transportation and all the conflicts of interest during a summer season. And here they are fully engaging and implementing a program to ensure students don't, participate in that summer slide. So I think that's what's really cool is that I'm actually just going to show you what districts across the state have said that work for them. I think some of the things I wanted to connect to were attendance. And obviously the first thing is that if students were there, that was the huge factor in growth, right? And we know that. Just nice again to read. One thing was that students who attended the most days had the best growth. Teachers were available to communicate with parents regularly. And that's what I hear a lot in these summer programs is these smaller teacher-student ratios is what creates the sort of familiar environment that empowers the teacher to have that relationship with the parent. So there are always barriers that we can traverse. Obviously, funding at schools is always a barrier if there's never feels like there's enough. But I really appreciated that they had a summer showcase that was spread out across multiple days. I thought that was interesting, right? Because when you think of a showcase, you think we have one night, one event. But what's really the goal there with that showcase? It's to get the parent to see the students' work. So could you do an hour each day after optional that you can have a parent pick which day. And so you do end up getting more parents to see more of their students' work. So that sort of flexible scheduling instead of one big event. And what I appreciate about Bristol here is saying that this was a different group of parents than last year. So just, once you know your parents, it's amazing what districts do to really pivot and try to work with them. Machias
That
Court?
relationship piece, definitely the relationship piece,
It's all
getting to
about
know
that.
your people, what they really need, what they value, and again, what they need for resources.
Yeah. I appreciated Machias Court. This is kind of the opposite, where they invited each morning, if they had 20 minutes of STEAM-based stations with students with logic puzzles and problems, they invited parents to linger. And I know that transportation can be a barrier, but I did appreciate hearing this piece of sort of, hey, one thing you can do is if you're ever dropping your kid off, we always do this, come on inside the classroom, come see what they're doing, and come play with them. And I thought that was really, really a cool idea. RSU 56. So if you saw like 2 slides ago, I didn't ask about family engagement practices. I don't know if you read the actual way that I asked the question. It was just best instructional practices. That's all I asked. And so I don't say family engagement, but this is what I receive when I asked what best practices were for student growth and outcomes. I receive things like this: incredible amount of effort around family engagement, weekly newsletters, earlier and regular contact with families, listservs, sort of an organized, streamlined process to get information out, which is where the district level should come in and assist the schools with these kinds of actual sort of systems, I would call them. Parent chaperones for field trips, end of summer celebrations, books and games for parents to continue students learning at home. And I love how RSU 56 basically summarized it there, right? They'll participate in the learning activities. They'll listen to students read. They'll hear students share their work. The focus will be continuing the games and activities at home, celebration that will include a story walk, materials to take home. So much about sort of we as a school are providing the things that you can that can wrap around and can be used after school. What's nice about budgeting for supplies for summer programs is that we do get a lot of districts that just give books to children in those programs.
But I do also like how this messaging, we last month we talked about the power of positive messaging. And in this, they very purposefully used active verbs for the role that families would take on. And I'm seeing you have the opportunity to participate, you have the opportunity to listen, you have the opportunity to read, to hear, to focus. And I really feel like this is a great way to draw families in and celebrate what their role is. We talk a lot about the fact that attendance is a team sport. The student, the teacher, the families, the administration, and the community partnerships that really, when we all come together, it affects the greatest supports for students.
And that's why I love the summer program for that, because it's sort of start to end holistic, and that those are the themes that come through in those programs. RSU 4, this was one of those moments where it's like plenty of staff, but the plenty of staff was used to essentially really make sure that parents were always being reached out to, maintaining ongoing, everybody, it's maintaining ongoing connection with families. So annual nights are great, family nights are great, but what is that ongoing connection? How is it baked into the classroom experience? How do you help teachers find an effective way to do it on top of everything else, maybe moving some other things outside of their purview so that they can focus on family engagement? It just depends on what the highest needs of your schools are. But essentially that ongoing communication with families is really what I felt was key here. Maine Arts Academy also ended up having a project where they displayed them to view and parents were invited. Of course, it's always great when a student has worked on something for a couple weeks for folks to come and celebrate that and see the work that they've done. So that's one I'm sure that most folks here are familiar with. I know Augusta puts all of the kids' projects out to the various elementary schools on all their nights, and it's always fun to see the work. I really appreciated RSU 17 for contacting families in person ahead of time. I feel like, again, during spring conferences and explaining what the summer program was, whether they could get their child there every day, and reaching out on the first day of absence to be like, we saw you, we noticed you, you're in this program, what's going on? Can we help you get to the program? And I will say what I do think I've seen, and I will mention this later on, is the flyers and the invitations for summer school, some of the most visually appealing flyers I've ever seen. And I appreciate that, because I think if you're asking parents for the commitment of having their students there in the summer to get greater assistance, and you potentially are asking them to consider vacations a different time or to have to do transportation, which I'll talk a bit about. How can you make it so that it's such a fun program, that it's appealing, it's camp-like, and so the kids and the families are actually quite excited that their child is part of the program, as opposed to feeling punished or something else, even that they need to be there, or something kind of disciplinary about it. We invited parents to observe a lesson. I thought that was cool. Shared many resources with families so that they could practice concepts at home. Coming in to observe a lesson is a very cool idea. And when that's possible, I think that's probably pretty powerful for the parents.
And for the
So
student to be able to share. When we think
yes,
about messaging, going back to that again, we're trying to kind of shift from um, how was your day? That's a good or bad answer. But really planting the seed of like, hey, during that math lesson today, can you talk to me a little bit about that partial sums algorithm? I've never even heard of that before. And it gives an opportunity for the student to shine and again, really ways that we can impact the conversations.
beautiful. So I will say, in summation, just those were some examples about family engagement, but overall strategies that improved attendance, small welcoming environments, familiar staff, strong relationships that direct early and ongoing communication with families. It's interesting transportation access. This is for summer school and specifically people like the vans instead of the big buses that they're going to school in the summer. That's always not a possibility for some, but very interesting to see. And some of the programs were smaller, so vans made sense for those districts that have them. But what I do want to just like note about this is that even if districts feel like they're not doing enough or what they're doing isn't working, I just want to pull back a little bit and remind folks that the fact that even districts do provide transportation and they feed the students is just one foundation to the fact that your schools are responding to student needs. That's the base right there. You're feeding the kids, you're getting them there. And then now, what else about the environment, about the instruction, and about the communication with families can be bolstered? I did find that high interest themes, which is why I want to talk about community partnerships here briefly. That is a bit different than homeschool partnership, but those field trips, those high interest themes where you bring in potentially a community partner or an author, those are absolutely tied to sort of improving the motivation and the engagement for students to be in those programs. And then specific family engagement strategies, I just want to summarize what the examples talked about. And again, just reiterating that camp-like experience versus trying to say it was, you're remedial, you need remediation. So instead of being out in the summer with your neighbors, come to school so we can be in a program and do these worksheets together. We want to, summer is a hard, that's why I wanted to show you guys it can be hard to get students there that you are worried about them being on grade level and slipping away and not being able to have some of those really important skills. So I know so many districts are consistently running summer school programs, both at the elementary level and the upper grades. And I will say that some of the what districts said was as soon as we made it less like a remedial program or something that you needed to write the messaging, the framing of this program, you saw students that were just excited to be there. And imagine a student, a young kid who doesn't really have a big break from the school building, but the summer program was so fun. They did this, they went here. You are doing more for that child than you realize, just in terms of their relationship to the school, and then probably the parents' then relationship to the school, right? When that child loved the summer program.
So Rita, I'm going back in my mind to some of our people might not have a summer program available, but how can we take that same thought and really leverage it in the school setting?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a
Yep.
thought on that?
Yeah, no, that's, so much of this. I just want to, I guess, reiterate the Title I pace for all this type of stuff. So, we like if you need support with multilingual communication, like beyond what's required by the state, you need supplemental help for that. Title I can pay for it. You want to do more family showcases, more family nights where they do games together or logic puzzles together, activities, perhaps instead of a showcase. You can pay with your Title I funds with that. So, I think summer, like I said, has those barriers to even student participation at all. And so it's nice to see how they engage with families to get them there, and those that are there show growth. So that's kind of the feedback loop. And so when I talk school-wide on February 4th, I will talk about what schools are doing throughout the school year as well.
I love it. I love it.
Oh, and I do want to then just the more at-home reading and practice was what districts talked about. And I do think that that's some of the things that's amazing about schools is that you actually do instill better life practices in students. They come home and they read perhaps instead of an iPad for 30 minutes. those are the kinds of things you do when you motivate students to be reading, enjoying school. You're actually instilling better practices at home, and that's probably quite powerful. So great to see that that's what districts have seen in their students. And the last thing I would talk about, I have I have a few slides left. I know it's a lot of talking, so thank you. But I just want to bring up community partnerships because they are heavily relied on in the summer. And that might be different than the school year, but I know that schools and districts have existing relationships. Could be with their Parks and Rec department, could be with a local university, could be with their library or other community organizations doing work. And I will say that that's leveraged really, I would say that's leveraged in almost every summer program. And it's really amazing to see. People invite a pilot they might know to talk about what it's like to fly a plane after reading a book about a pilot. They will bring in their local firefighters to talk about fire safety, and they'll read a story together. Just those ideas that they're learning is beyond the scope of their school, and that even though they might be in a high poverty school district, there are community partners there that can instill a fun of learning and knowing their sense of place and identity with where they live, right? What's different? Lewiston's different than Augusta, which is different than Calais, which is different than Portland. So what about your local identity? It's why I love New England. I'm not from here originally. And the fact that these small towns have such an identity, such a history. How can you engage with that richness with the students and maybe make them feel like they're important because they're part of a place? So it's very cool to see that that's what happened in summer programs. A lot of gardening, ocean studies for our coastal schools, which is really, I always think is fun. There's whale watching they do at the end. I think that was, I don't remember, it might have been, it was one of them that I think I ended up deleting the slide, but really incredible stuff. Maple tapping at Harmony, I think was that school district. So just an incredible amount of community partnership and experiential learning opportunities that basically districts said engaged the students so much that they wanted to come back every day. And then key takeaways. So we talk about attendance. We talk about, how important family engagement is for attendance, and then attendance is for outcomes and growth. So it's good to see, a lot of districts ask for transportation for the summer programs. That helps their program. It's not cheap, but it's, for summer school, it's crucial for many who don't otherwise have it. But beyond transportation and feeding students, which I'm so glad we do in this state, we consider how personal outreach is conducted and how to create a culture around the importance of attendance. And I sit on the school board in Augusta, and I am sort of always blown away by the principals of those schools that sort of own this particular initiative on attendance. They either post the scores and they're competing, or I think that was at Huzzy even, Sue, before or during your time, and they would draw a perfect attendance raffle at the end of the month. And it just created this sort of fun, engaging way to think about, I should be at school every day. And so that's cool to see on that level. Expanding family engagement, right? Those take-home resources, those family events, transparent communication. And then I think what Sarah mentioned before, it's that reduction of barriers. So do you have maybe some additional funding lying around that will maybe enable some flexibility for different parents to be involved in different ways? If you've got someone who can never come to those nights, can they come in the mornings? And what does it mean to potentially get them there to talk about their student and their learning? And then community partnerships. Like I mentioned, summer school, I see it leveraged really effectively, really deeply. And how can we do that in a sustained and consistent way through the school year? So it's really cool to see. It's all related, but academic instruction that's targeted, real world learning experiences, and then that relationship centered environment. That's when folks said those summer programs worked for them. So really exciting. And the last bit that I wanted to share before I answer any and all questions that folks have, is I'm going to share all of these resources. There are family engagement requirements in Title I that do feel a little heavy and cumbersome, but can, with the right sort of perspective and thought, be pretty well embedded in what schools are already doing. to communicate with families. So there's always happy to talk through with districts how to do that. There's a non-regulatory guidance for the super mega policy nerds who want to hear from the U.S. Department of Education on everything related to Title I family engagement and how to implement it. The Title I spending snapshot is the allowability for Title I, and there is a family engagement section in case you want to know if something's allowable or not allowable under Title I. And as I mentioned before, I'll be doing a school-wide training because if family engagement or attendance are high needs, you can leverage your school-wide Title I funding towards initiatives to help with that. So I'm, again, Rita Pello, and I know for many of you who I do know, if you work with a regional program manager, you can reach out to them, or you can reach out to me.
Holy,
I will stop sharing.
that was fantastic, Rita. Wow. First off, I cannot say thank you enough. That was just a plethora of information to share. Before I go into my thought, I'm gonna turn to Julie. Julie, your hand is raised.
Thank you, Rita. In a lot of the national conversations I attend, I hear a lot about wanting to honor parents' time by providing stipends to participate on advisories. Can Title I family engagement money be used for stipends?
I believe they can.
Yeah, so
I can look into that. I believe they can, even for instance, that childcare, where if you wanted to provide childcare for, you could probably pay your pre-K or one of your educators or a daycare professional to come and be there that night. So it's not unpaid, but it's paid, so that parents can come and don't have a childcare barrier. What really, Julie, is, I think, the crux of Title I is the high needs. So, and the reasonable and necessary with any sort of federal funding. So if it has been a huge barrier, if certain parents just can't engage and the school is working really hard to do so, is it reasonable and necessary? What is the cost related to what they receive in Title I? Because you could make an argument that the stipends would get the parents there to do the meaningful work. And that's the work that needs to be done to meet the high needs of those students. And that can be considered.
You know, it's interesting, Rita, when we think about the childcare barriers, many people that are interested in the information that would be shared in an evening, especially if it was, I think you used an example of maybe some literacy work for or ELL work or anything where maybe there are evenings that you would totally want to have students present, but there might be a time in the programming that it would be best to have a different audience. Many schools I have heard of have been accessing like National Honor Society students or high school students who are looking to gain community service hours as part of a graduation requirement. And so they've been leveraging that.
Yep.
So it's really about looking at a big picture. If you did not have access to Title I funding for those purposes,
right,
you could still look at what other options your community has to help support something like that.
Yep.
As far as the stipend for advisory opportunities for parents, you said you're pretty sure. Is that something
I'll
that
look into the non-regulatory guidance, because in the statute from ESEA, it does talk about having parent advisory councils, and it talks about reducing barriers. And those two things could potentially be argued that reduces the barrier for a council that could do high needs work. But I will look into, because statute is fun and gray, I will look into it before I make that recommendation to districts. Before I would make that recommendation into districts, at least for Title I funding. It could be that the local school district really wants to try it. And it's always a matter of, okay, well, maybe we won't do stipends with federal dollars, because Title I now, supplement not to plan, is a little bit more flexible. So even if you try it with local funds 1 year, you could use federal funds on it as long as you're neutral budgeting. That's fun. We love federal supplemental programs for all that fancy language. But essentially, I'll look into it. I think it's always reasonable, necessary, and high needs. And if you can document that and understand how to sort of prove that, have that evidence, that burden of proof, there's a good chance that something like that could be allowable.
So what I will do is when Rita gets back to me with that information, I will just send it out in an email to everyone so that you would have that information. And that was a great question there. I was going to before, one of the things that I was thinking about at the very beginning, I told you that recently my lens around attendance has really been focused on the importance of family engagement. And I was actually reading a brief by the National Center on Educational Outcomes today, and it was talking about the importance of early learners and how one of the things that often Title I funding is used in the early childhood realm. Am I correct with that, Rita?
Mhm.
Okay. And so we talked about, when you and I were having a conversation, we were talking about really thinking about the importance of building that foundational attendance practice with our earliest learners. And I came across some
Mhm.
interesting information today about that and some statistics thinking about our pre-K through grade 1 students. They are much less likely to read on grade level by grade 3 if they experience chronic absenteeism in pre-K through 1.
Mhm.
If you are not reading on grade level by the end of grade 3, you are 4 times more likely to be a dropout. If
Wow.
in high school, we found that regular attendance is a better indicator than test scores, a better indicator of success for high school students than even test scores. And then the final statistic that I heard that just, kind of dropped me to my knees, or kept me in my seat, I should say, was students in grades 8 through 12 who are exhibiting chronic absenteeism for even 1 year of that 8 through 12 timeframe are 7 times more likely to be dropouts.
Mm.
So we're really looking at what are the proactive responses that we can, the preventative responses and strategies that we can engage in at a systemic level so that we don't get to that. And
Mhm.
I love the fact that many of the suggestions that you made tonight, this afternoon, not tonight. Oh my gosh, it gets dark and I start losing my sense of time here. But many of the suggestions that you made, Rita, were all around the importance of engagement, not only for the students, but for the families as well. So the more I learn, it's all about dropping the silos instead of focusing on one thing, really thinking about the big picture and the systemic integration of our practices. So uh,
Absolutely.
that was
Absolutely.
great.
And
Great.
yes, and that's why for folks that know me, they know that I really want schools to consider moving to school-wide Title I programs if they're currently targeted assistance, just because of the ways in which that legislation is written to enable that. I would argue, Sarah, that sort of overarching thinking about the entire school and the entire program.
And again,
Um,
what is something you could do to make that shift? What is a next step for that process?
Yeah, to attend the training on February 4th and to fill out the CNA and school-wide plan for that school. And to do some of that planning with your leadership teams around what the high needs would be and what they would want that program to look like. So I'll be going through that in 2 weeks, just about with the field. And that will be recorded and there will be guidances that follow, etc. But yeah, just trying to empower districts to realize that they already fill out that CNA for the most part. And if they have one per school, they would meet school-wide plan requirements and they can really start to consider how to leverage funds with more flexibility and to serve all students depending on needs more flexibly as well.
I always found that very odd as a classroom educator
Yeah.
when I know that there have been many shifts made and I appreciate it, but I've only been out of the classroom for a minute or two. So I know that that's a shift that's still in the process.
Yep.
And it always struck me as, don't we want all of our kids engaging in these fantastic practices? So I appreciate you kind
Mhm.
of opening an opportunity for navigating that, especially it sounds like it's a pretty easy shift.
I think it can be. It just has to be thoughtful and collaborative with school leaders and parents and such, right? There's a lot of federal requirements, but that's what we're here to do is make sure that districts and schools feel like they know what those are so that they can navigate them in a way that empowers their programs and their initiatives, the things that they care about for their students. So I do think school-wide I think school-wide has a kind of a wider door for that potential than targeted assistance does. And I'm happy to talk through any districts who want to think about that. Just because I really think that the professionals know what their schools need, and it would be nice if instead of planning the funds, they funded the plan.
I like that. That's your catchphrase. We'll give a T-shirt there with that. I like that.
Yeah.
Well, we have about 10 to 13 minutes left in our time together. A couple real quick things that I did want to just bring up, and then I'm going to open it to questions. Our next time coming together is not going to be the third Thursday of February. Hopefully at that time you will all be on, many of you will be on vacation, enjoying yourselves, kicking back, getting a little bit of well-deserved rest. So we have made a little bit of a shift in our scheduling, and our next time coming together will be February 26th, which is the fourth Thursday of February. And at that time, our content expert will be Courtney Angelisante, and she'll be focusing on implementing positive recognition and motivation strategies. So that'll be another layer of really thinking about an increased attendance and that whole sense of belonging and engagement. But again, that's going to be on Thursday, February 26th, and I'll make sure that that is in our follow-up email. In that follow-up email, you will all be receiving following this. You will have a recording of our time together if you wanted to share that with someone. That will also be housed on our MEAC webpage, along with a follow-up document that will have it will include Rita's jam-packed slide deck with all of the statutes. It was interesting. Rita was like, holy Jiminy Crickets. I don't think those are her words, so we're probably my words, but she was like, these statutes are long and complicated. And I said, why don't we just take like a look at them and then we can include them in our resource bundle. So for those of you, as she said, those of you that love to read that stuff, it will be right there for your access. So we'll have that. And I don't think I have anything else that I need to share as far as our whole office hour series goes. So let's open up our last few minutes to any questions that you might have for our content expert.
I don't have a video, so I can't raise my hand. Okay. But I'm so sorry. I'm not even being shown now. I've played around with this so much, I can't even find myself on the screen. But Sarah, I just want to say how much I appreciate your office notes and everything that you send. They are concise and easy to pass on. Very much appreciated. And Rita, I am going to push this February 4th. I think even if you are school-wide, or you think you're school-wide, it is a good refresher about what school-wide is. So thank you so very much.
And I will note that Shelley Chassis-Gendreau did provide that registration link in our chat. That too will be part of our follow-up email, and I'll make sure that that's prominent there so that you can easily pass that on to colleagues. Thank you, Shelley, for doing that. Julie.
I can't help myself. I just get so excited and I have ideas to share. But I have two things. Rita, one is I'm wondering, when you say that we have SAUs that receive at least 500,000, I don't think there are very many of them. I think it's probably a handful.
It'd be a surprise. It's not just Portland and Lewiston, right? It's not just the big schools. There are certain RSUs like 57, and there are more than you think, honestly.
Okay, so my thought is, have we ever thought about doing a community of practice focused on that family engagement percentage? So I want to plant that seed with you because I think that would be helpful.
Fun. Yeah, I agree.
And then the other seed I want to plant with all of our attendees, when you were talking about community partnerships, this might sound like a crazy idea, but I'm going to let it land and maybe you'll take it. I just have this vision of businesses or community entities adopting classrooms. And the example I will give is that my best friend teaches math at Westbrook High School. My other best friend is the bank manager for the credit union. Imagine if these two, if Angie, my best friend's math class, partnered with this bank entity, and the people from the bank went in and talked about financial literacy. And there was some reciprocity where the kids in the class went in and maybe put artwork, or maybe they volunteered on the weekend to beautify the space. I just think that that sometimes we get limited in our thinking about community partnerships. And so I challenge the people on this call to think about who in your community might you adopt as a class that could really benefit your students and parents, but then you could also benefit them. So that's another community partnership idea I just wanted to bring forth.
I love that. Yeah, and Julie, I will say to big back, I think there's a lot. I think there's a lot of room. I think there's room. Certain communities really do have a lot of adults I've met, professionals that are like so excited about partnering with schools on certain things. I will say that I want to go back on what I said about paying parents. I wouldn't say you could pay them directly with federal funds. Federal funds are a little crazy that way, but you could quite literally reduce every barrier. You could pay for their transportation if it's reasonable and necessary. You could pay for childcare for them to be there. You could pay for refreshments for them to be there, and any training materials or items or books you want them to have. So that's, I would say, the reduction of the barrier of them being engaging and participating is like the crux with federal funds versus paying them directly. So I want to go, after I had a moment to think about that, that's my recommendation. Yeah.
I appreciate the shift in why are they not coming? They don't want to be here. To what is it that we could do to support them in reducing the barriers so that they could be here if this was something. And another thing that you mentioned 2 different times, and it caught my ear both times, was if it's a family that just can't make it there at night. Often we provide these opportunities at night or late, late in the afternoon. What if we could do a morning opportunity, or even a community? I don't remember who it was saying that. I think you said Augusta provides the parent-teacher conferences 3 different
ways,
3 different formats. So if we could consider doing that as well.
Absolutely, right. And when is the community event really important, that it's like everybody's there at once, or when is the event or the engagement with family more important that it's just family to child or family to classroom? Because it just depends, that you might have different events that just look different, or different themes or initiatives that look different, right? Maybe not just one night, but maybe there's a few nights in a month, or one, a sort of continuation of certain teachers that you can pay for to stay late. Teachers you can pay to stay late, if that's going to get more families engaged. So there's that.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah, if they're paid if any work outside of contract hours, if they're working towards the high needs documented in their Title I schools, especially school-wide, right? Or if they're that Title I teacher working with targeted assistance schools and you want them to stay after school to work with the parents, you can pay that teacher. Yep.
Ooh.
I'm
so glad I came
professionals
to
being paid for the work they do. Could you imagine in education such a thing? So,
Ooh. Oh, that sounds awesome. Any other thoughts that you'd just like to? I know we have a couple minutes left, and when we initially started the office hours, we had the idea that it wouldn't just be like a sit and get. It would be an opportunity for us to come together in a collaborative manner to talk about challenges and share success stories. And we just haven't been able to make that happen. But we do have a couple minutes left. At the very beginning, people did share some of their best practices as far as strengthening school-home partnerships. Would anyone like to speak to the success that their SAU has seen in some of these opportunities? That wait time kills me. I'd love to see participants drop an idea they heard that is resonating with them. What a great
little exit slip. Is that a
that.
family engagement strategy that you ask at the end how it went, what they thought, what they're taking away? Because that is another thing with federal funds. They love evidence of parents providing feedback. So if you have an annual night, might as well have an exit slip for them so you can collect and document that feedback on how those nights are going, because that hits a requirement and you don't have to do something else like a survey if you don't want to, right? It's all about understanding your structures and how they could meet those requirements and doing an effective job with that. So definitely let me know what resonated. And if you still have wonderings, I'm almost more curious about that, because as I continue to curate trainings for the field, this is definitely a passion project for me, family engagement, Title I in general. Really passionate about this work, working with high poverty schools. So happy to do a training that is a different one or meets different needs. So let me know also if you feel like there was a gap and you'd like that gap filled. So.
Well, Rita, I cannot thank you enough. I would invite folks to, oh goodness, get 2 minutes back in their day. And as you send off, maybe you could just leave us with one thought, as we said, just something that's resonating. One word, one sentence, one thought. Thank you so much for your time. I do look forward to seeing you in February 26th. Thank you again for your time. Please reach out with any questions you might have.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Rita. Thank you.